Hello everyone and welcome back to the next episode of Transracial Adoption, Positive or Negative. My name is Xinru and I'm here today with my co-host, my mother.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth. This is the last episode in the series and we're going to be addressing the central issue, which is transracial and international adoption a positive or a negative thing, although we don't expect to come to a one-word answer. So what do you think?
Big question. I think it's really difficult to answer that. I don't really know where to begin, really. I think...
Has it been good for you? I mean, again, I don't expect a yes or a no. In what respects has it been good or bad for you?
I think if you had to weigh up the pros and cons, I think the pros would probably slightly outweigh the cons. For me, it has been positive because... I guess this question itself turns into the whole... adoptees are seen as very lucky, by the outside, by most outsiders, who don't necessarily realise everything, the complex details of what happens with an adoption and the trauma that is there. So it has been positive for me, but that's not to say there haven't been many negative things.
Is this adoption or the transracial aspects? Both.
I think both. I think the question, you can't really answer the question without covering both adoption and transracial adoption.
And international adoption. So that's three things, really.
Yeah, exactly. So it's a very complex question.
Yeah.
Overall, the whole experience would I'd say it's been beneficial and positive for me because I've come to England. I've been brought up in a wealthy country. I've had a lot more opportunities than I would have done back in China. I now speak English. There's language privilege. I now speak English. And I have been very well educated, which isn't an opportunity that most people in the world necessarily have.
No.
I would say overall I've had a very positive outcome if you look at it generally. On paper you'd say, well, she's done very well. She's had the support of a family. She's been moved to a wealthier country. She's had all of these opportunities and is set up to do whatever she really wants to do. And if you compare that to what would have happened, then
we don't know, of course.
We don't know, but...
I assume there are educational opportunities for those who are in a position to take them in China, but they wouldn't have been as good as here.
No, it wouldn't have been...
No.
It wouldn't have been like I wouldn't have had the life that I have had if I had stayed in China.
No.
It would have been a very, very, very different life. But then who's to say I wouldn't have been happier in other aspects of my life?
You'd have fitted in completely from a racial angle, and you would know that this was the country where you were born and where your birth parents probably still lived, wouldn't you? So, what do you think most of your peers think? Because you know a lot of transracially adopted people, don't you?
I think a lot of them think it's been great, that it has been positive. I think a lot of them have. I have that opinion.
Any of them negative?
I know of people who have negative opinions, but in my personal circle and my personal friends, I don't think any of them have necessarily an overall negative perception of adoption. I think they're all very glad that they were adopted. But that's not to say that they don't think that there are negative aspects to it and that there are difficulties and struggles that come with it. But I think overall they would say that it probably has been the best course of action.
Yeah. Because, for example, a few years ago, some people may remember this, there was, I think she's a dame, but anyway, I think her name's Emma Nicholson, a very prominent person who has made her way in the world in spite of being profoundly deaf. And I was used to really, really like her until she came out saying she wanted to ban international adoption in spite of the fact that she adopted a boy, I don't know from which country, internationally. And I just thought she was such a hypocrite. You know, someone I really respected, and she'd adopted her son and then said she wanted to close the door for everybody else.
But maybe it's because she realised how difficult it was and the struggles that her own child faced. And she didn't want it to happen to other families.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, maybe that's what changed her mind. Because she saw what it was like for her child.
Yeah, I suppose so. So there are people like that who are very much against it. And in some ways I have a lot of reservations about it. I tried to make up for all the difficulties and the downsides that there were, but I did have some reservations about it. I just felt that you just have to be sure that there's a genuine need, that the child couldn't have been left in a good life where they were. So that's always the conflict for the parents, isn't it? Am I creating difficulties for the child, or am I solving that child's difficulties?
Yeah, it is hard. It is hard. I don't think I would recommend adopting transracially to other people. No, I don't think I would, because it is very difficult, and it's so much more complex than people realise. And I've spoken about this as well on my own platforms before, that the whole lucky thing and other things like that, where adoption is generally seen as such a positive thing, and the reality is that it's not positive. There are so many difficulties with it, so many consequences that aren't spoken about or known about in the public eye, and that's also why we wanted to start this podcast, to highlight that there are certain aspects and issues that do arise from something like this, and although it might seem positive on the outside, I as an adoptee have had many struggles.
I think some parents are in denial, and I think the children, if they're fond of the parents, they don't want to say something that's going to hurt the parents, don't they? Whereas I've always had quite a melancholic view of the world, and right from the start I didn't assume that you would think it was a wonderfully good thing. I never minded the possibility that you might see all the downsides to it. Right from the start. So, for example, I didn't start out celebrating your adoption day or Ching Ching's adoption day. I would mention it on the day, but we didn't have a big celebration because I was aware that that was the day on which, you were committed then to leaving your birth country and coming to Britain and being adopted by me, and you might not necessarily see it as something to celebrate. So I didn't take the initiative on that. It was you two who did, saying that you wanted to celebrate it, you wanted to mark the day and everything. Because other people did, I suppose. You knew other people did. But I never felt I should say that. Whereas some parents, right from the start, make this huge celebration.
Yeah, especially American families. I think it's a bit too much. They call it Gotcha Day, and I don't know. I think there's a bit, the rhetoric there is a bit insensitive, and I've seen from on my own networks. I'm part of lots of groups as well on Facebook and social media with adoptees, and a lot of them take issue with those words as well. And it's, I think, it's not necessarily ill-intended, but it's not well thought through.
No, it's like the other thing that you get a lot is people with a religious faith who say, obviously with great sincerity, that they can see that God intended that child for them, that they felt this strong bond, and that there was something greater than themselves who had brought them together, and they were so glad of that, and it was all so wonderful. And I just think, yes, I know some people believe that, but if you're saying that, you're saying to the child, God wanted you to be left by your parents and to come to me as an adopted child. And it's hard to fight God, isn't it? If it doesn't feel good for you, it's hard to fight God. Do you see what I mean?
Yeah, I can see how the child would then find it very difficult to say anything negative about anything that's happened.
It's a dangerous theory. But, if people really believe it, what can you do? People of a religious faith often believe that, I'm sure. I think it's a dangerous theory. And there's all those things all the time, aren't there? So what do you think your life would have been like if you stayed in China? I mean, we think you would probably have remained in the SWI, possibly fostered, but possibly not. So when we went there were sort of apartments of parents with foster parents with a few children all living with them. So you would have grown up in a sort of Chinese family as a foster child, wouldn't you? You would have been educated.
Yeah, this is a very sensitive topic to be talking about. I've never actually... No, we can talk about it, but I've never ever thought about it enough to even discuss it, really. Never really thought about that.
Have to discuss it,
but I would say that, yeah, I probably would have stayed at the children's home, and they had the on-site independent flats where the older children lived. So I probably would have stayed there, and then maybe have got some kind of education with state funding.
You would have had a normal education that all children in China
But I mean for university, though.
Yeah, and then you would have had to go for scholarships. I feel sure there must be opportunities for bright children.
Yeah, but I wouldn't have been able to go to any of the big universities, I don't think.
Yeah.
Yeah, very unlikely to have gone to any of the big ones.
I just don't know.
No,
but yeah.
I think it's very unlikely.
But you wouldn't have had that family background behind you, somewhere to go home to, would you? You'd have been very much on your own once you're an adult. That's always the problem here in Britain too, isn't it? With children in care, the danger is, it used to be you're on your own from 18. Now it's 21.
Yeah. But I think I would have been with other children from the children's home who were in the same situation as me.
You have known each other.
Sort of known each other.
Like siblings.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Yes.
Obviously it's not the same though.
No.
But then also we don't know what would have happened if I wasn't put up for adoption. Maybe I would have stayed with my foster family longer, and maybe they would have decided to adopt me, and who knows?
It wasn't possible at the stage at which I got either you or Ching for the families to have a second child. They did change the rules soon afterwards, but they couldn't have done if they had one child, which most of them did. For someone to become a foster mother, they would almost certainly have a child, and that was their way of working while the child was small.
But I may have had a relationship with the foster family.
Yeah. Because a lot of the carers at the social welfare institutes are very nice people who are very interested in how children turn out and things, don't they? Do you remember when we went back to your SWI and the woman who brought you to me was there? And she was so thrilled with all the photos of you at university and everything, wasn't she?
Yeah.
She was delighted with it all. One of their girls had done really well and everything. Yeah, that was nice. One of the things that struck me about the whole debate about, well, adoption right or wrong, but it's even more so when you're talking about international adoption, is the theory that's in this book, The Primal Wound, by Nancy Verrier. As a lot of people know, this made a huge impact on British social workers, probably in America too, I don't know, but anyway, certainly it was just a book that she wrote. She had one adopted child and one birth child, and she studied both of them because she was in psychiatry, and wrote this book about how she felt that whatever you do, and even if you adopt a child pretty much at birth, there's a primal wound inflicted on a child when they're separated from their birth mother, which can never be completely repaired. And she talked about things that make it better. So in her relationship, she didn't have a particularly good relationship with her adopted child, but she did with her birth child. And she said her relationship with her adopted child started to get better from the day she finally accepted that she could not replace the birth mother. So that was interesting, wasn't it? And the influence of this book and this theory is the reason why in Britain and probably elsewhere social services went from encouraging adoption to trying everything in their power to keep a child with its birth family, sometimes to the detriment of the child's future, really, if it was an abusive or a difficult or a neglectful family. It's a long time since you or I read The Primal Wound, but we have both read it. I didn't agree with everything in it, but it did make a huge impression on me. And I certainly I've never felt I could replace the birth mothers. I think for some adoptive parents that is a really big struggle, and they really want to believe that they can. So I think that's hard for some people. But I always felt that was okay, I could understand that. So I really, on the whole, accepted, I think, the main premise of this book, which is that there is a sort of wound inflicted on a child when they're separated from the birth mother. historically, of course, loads of mothers died as the result of childbirth, so you would have had lots and lots of people in previous centuries that would have had the wound inflicted because the mother died of puerperal fever or whatever it was. Nowadays, it's more if the child's separated at birth. Apparently you get the same phenomenon when a child's born prematurely and put into intensive care and the mother's just not there, and you get the same effect with that. But I felt that was a wound that needed to be healed as far as possible, and one of the obvious things would be to try and find birth parents and to keep you in touch with everything that you've lost and to accept that you had lost quite a lot of things. So I wondered if you felt that there was a primal wound, and if so, how important is it to try and find a birth family or any other contacts from the start of your life? Is that something that's important, and are you aware of that, do you think?
I think I'm definitely more aware of the importance of a person's first year of their life, the baby, when you're a baby or when you're growing in the womb even, having read not only the primal wound but then being interested myself, going off and researching what happens in the very early stages of a child's life and understanding the psychology behind it and how a child develops at that age and the relationship they have with their birth mother. So I do understand the importance of that, and I know that there is so much that happens in that first year of life that I won't have had, and even during when you're actually pregnant. So one of my best friends has just given birth, and she said that she noticed a lot of things happening, during her pregnancy, but then also now that the child is now 2, but all through those years, especially up until 1, she saw so much. She saw with her own eyes how much her own parents had missed of her life, because she's also adopted. So I think the proof is kind of there in real life that there is a lot that happens and goes on in those years. So there's definitely something important that has been lost and missed there. As far as whether I have always felt as though I've been missing something, I wouldn't say I felt it as strongly as other adoptees I know. I don't have this strong desire to go and find my birth parents or to do anything really of that sort, but I think that's down to people's own individual choices and journeys that they go through being an adoptee, because a lot, for me, I haven't allowed myself to even think about those things for a long time, so I haven't even sat down and processed things like that myself, whereas other people have, or other people are not even that far along or might never get to that stage where they even want to look. A lot of people just decide to just completely kind of block it out or ignore it, and they don't want to face it for whatever reason, whether conscious or not, of that choice. So for me, I haven't allowed myself to really sit and sit with the grief and sit and think about all of those things enough for me to want to go and do that. So that's what I'm going to say about that, because I mean it's too personal and I haven't actually gone and done that work myself. But I would say that growing up there was always what felt that was missing was less specifically the birth family or the birth parents, but more that I didn't know anyone who looked like me, and that I was just more intrigued. I was very intrigued. Oh, what features have I got from my mum? What features have I got from my dad? I think that was probably what stood out. That's not to say that that's the only thing. I think there probably is a lot more to it than that, but I just haven't allowed myself to think about it or even want to talk about it, even if I had publicly, because it's very personal.
No.
But yeah, that's what I'd say overall.
It's interesting that as a little girl you were incredibly open about it all, I suppose because you were too young to realise the sort of layers involved. And then suddenly, as you got older, you didn't talk about it at all. It was very obvious that you just didn't want to talk about it. And I'd try and bring the subject up, and you wouldn't want to talk about it. But you're a bit more open to talking about it now. So that's interesting. And also, when your friend was expecting her baby, do you remember us all saying, "Oh, we really hope the baby looks like her"? We all said that, didn't we?
Yeah.
Because we knew she didn't know any of her birth family, and I just thought, wouldn't it be lovely if the baby looked like her? And of course, he does. Very much like her. Not entirely like her, but very much like her.
Yeah.
So she can look at him every day, can't she? And see herself. Must be miraculous when she's never seen that.
Yeah.
Amazing. Yeah, that was really nice. If you were to try and find, or not just you, anyone was to try and find birth families in an international situation, unless you've, in the unusual event that you adopt from a culture that's got the same language, so the people who've adopted from the USA, for instance, it's not the same, but there's always the language and the cultural gap as well. I'm wondering if that's a problem. I mean, I actually think from my observation of television programmes and things like that, is that there's a gap between the child and their birth family anyway, language or no language, but really the language gap and the culture gap won't help, will it? I mean, you've got friends who've actually found their birth families. Do you think that the fact that it's international is a problem, more of a problem than if it had been domestic?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I think the culture and the language, obviously, first of all, they can't really communicate themselves or express themselves in the way they might want to. And second of all, yeah, culturally as well. Because if it was say I was adopted, or say I was white and I was adopted in England, and then I found my birth parents, it'll be so much easier to relate to them, to talk to them, because you've all grown up in the same environment, and it's it's all culturally the same. Whereas me going to find, or someone, a Chinese adoptee, for example, going to find their birth parents in China is completely different. And a lot of people might find it very, very difficult to reconcile the two, because although they're standing in front of their biological parents and people who are biologically related to them, they might find that they have not many things in common besides looking like each other, and it can be very, very difficult, which is also one reason why I know a lot of other adoptees have no desire to look, because they don't want, well, either they're too scared to know what the reason, or if they do find them, they just don't like the thought that they find them, but then there's no relationship or anything.
But that can happen domestically.
No, I know that can
really
happen. Yeah, I know that can as well, but I think it doesn't help the language and the cultural barrier at all.
No.
I think it's a lot easier to relate to them, even if there's no relationship, but to be able to just talk to them, because there's an underlying unspoken understanding of how you both see the world and how you've both been brought up. Because it's the same culture.
But there's also more of an expectation that you'll be able to get on easily.
That's true.
People often have very, very high expectations, don't they, which are smashed if they don't really get on. And I've seen some very interesting cases on some of this long-lost family thing. I mean, it's usually a happy ending, but not always. Well, the realistic ones, it's not always a happy ending. It's quite hard when you've got that gulf that you haven't shared. It's quite hard to bridge the gulf.
Yeah, no, I agree. I think regardless it is difficult, but the language and the cultural barrier definitely adds another obstacle.
So with the difficulties of, in particular, obviously international transracial adoption, what are the things that could make it work? Or could it never work? I mean, adoption is always going to be second best in a way, isn't it? Because it's trying to solve a problem. It's not the ideal for the child, which would probably be to be with their birth family, if their family were okay. So, putting aside the fact that it is in a way a sort of second best option, what could make it work with international adoption? What are the things that would really matter to making it okay?
I think that's hard for me to answer without being biased.
Yeah.
I think it's very hard for me to answer without being biased.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what it would be like without having any of the exposure and experience that I've had growing up. Because I could, the obvious answer I could say is, oh, well, it's really important they stay connected to their culture, it's really important they go back to the country, it's really important they do this, but that's because I've done that. And I can't speak on other people's behalves for what they feel when they haven't had that, or they haven't had any contact with their original culture or their heritage or anything.
So we don't really know even now, do we, whether it matters, because you, in the course of sort of children adopted from China events and so on, have come across children who've lived in white areas with very little exposure to anything Chinese. And they seem to be okay, don't they? Or am I imagining that?
Yeah, I mean, I've come across people who do seem to be okay. I've come across people who have a relationship with China, or go back a lot, or have learnt the language, or even have studied at university, things like that. And they're also okay, or they're not okay. I think I've met people on both ends of the spectrum, people who've had exposure and people who haven't had exposure. Either way, everyone's not really okay. Well, there are some people who I guess are okay. They don't really see it or think of it, and that's completely fine. But maybe they will in the future come across something that's a trigger or makes them see or makes them question themselves. But I don't know. I think it's really difficult because there are people that I come across who seem, but the thing is they seem fine, but then they might not be. They might have other struggles that they don't necessarily realise are related to adoption. You know, for example, in their personal relationships, their romantic relationships, or even their friendships. They might have this sense of not really belonging or fitting in, and attribute that to, oh, it's because I'm this or it's because I'm that, and never think it's to do with their background. So it's difficult because also these people who I'm meeting who might appear okay on the outside, well, there's probably also a reason why they are still coming to these events and still have friends and still stay connected to the adoption community because it probably means something to them.
Yes, yeah. I always wonder what happened to a girl I only ever heard about because her stepmother came along to one of our West London group adoption events, and she had a long chat with me, and she was very concerned about this girl, but she said, it's not my business, she's not my daughter. I'm just her stepmother. The girl lived with her adoptive mother, and the father saw a lot of her. And this woman was very clued up, and she'd come along. What do you think? She cared so much. She came along to West London Group to meet all of us, but she never came back. I think it must have just not worked out for her. And she wanted her husband to give the daughter some exposure to other adoptees, to Chinese culture. She thought of it all for herself.
So it was a Chinese adoptee?
The child was a Chinese adoptee, and that's why the woman was concerned. It was her own idea. I thought she was very sensible, and she tried to look into it. And she said whenever she said to her husband, I think your daughter needs to have some exposure to people who look like her and who've had the same background as her, he would just poke her up and go, there's nothing wrong with my daughter. That was his reaction. You only need to do these things if there's something wrong with her.
See, that's the thing. That's what everyone thinks, that there's nothing wrong with transracial adoption. There's no negative aspects and there's no issues there. Everyone thinks it's so rosy and it's all, happy and, they're all fine and they're a baby. That there's nothing that they're not going to remember anything. It doesn't matter at all. But it just really frustrates me because there's so much to it. There's so much more there. There are issues. There is a lot of trauma. There is a lot of things that the adoptees go through that people just don't understand, or we don't feel able to even voice because you get hit back at saying no, that why are you ungrateful, you've been so lucky, look at what your life is like now. And so it's just really annoying.
A lot of friends of mine, at work and things like that, they would say those things, lucky.
Really? Yes, it's really annoying. It really annoys me. Well, why am I lucky?
I used to say things like, I hope on the whole they'll feel on balance that it was a good thing, but I don't mind if they don't. It's up to them to decide. I always took that view. I think I've just been to so many lectures telling me that you might not think it was a good idea, that I was quite, and I have a melancholic turn of mind, so I was accepting of that. Whereas some parents were desperate to believe it was all a load of rubbish, really desperate to believe it, and I think it's hard for their children then to say anything because they feel that it's a betrayal of their parents. Definitely. Yeah, so I suppose one of the key issues then is do we think that Britain is a racist country? Now, we know it is. There's lots of incidents and evidence that it is a racist country. But when I adopted you, I felt that for you, as a girl and Chinese in a white household, you'd probably, on balance, not come across much racism. But I think you feel as though there's been quite a lot, don't you?
No, yeah, I've had racism. I've experienced racism my whole life, and it's kind of almost become the norm. You just become so accustomed to it that when I walk down the street now and I get people shouting at me, you just have to brush it off because you're just kind of used to it, which sounds really bad and really sad, and it shouldn't be that way, but that's just the reality. Ever since I was at junior school, I would have people come up to me and say ching chong. I'd have, cars would drive past you on the street. They'd roll down the window and scream racist slurs at you. People in school would, pull their eyes and say ching chong. Lots of different things. And even today, even now, when I'm walking down the street as an adult, I'd have people say racist things to me, or say ching chong, or try and say ni hao, konnichiwa, walking down the street, and it's not them trying to be friendly, it's them being, and I'll say to them up front, why are you being racist? Because A, they're assuming that I'm Japanese if they're saying konnichiwa or something other than Chinese to me, and B, even if they did get it right and it was and they were saying Chinese to me, why are they saying that to me in Chinese? Why can't they just say hello in English?
Yeah. That's one of the hardest things to pin people down on with racism is why comment at all?
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't it? Yeah.
And I get that a lot when I'm travelling solo to other countries. All the time I get people saying konnichiwa, konnichiwa. I'm like, that's racist. Why are you saying that to me?
And you're sure it's not with some kind of strange intention of being friendly?
No.
They very rarely did it when I was with you. I had a couple of ching chongs that I think we've already mentioned, on the beach once and when we were in Greece, but it was very rare when I was with you. Do you think that my presence put them off, or the fact that you were children?
The fact that I was a child, I think.
I mean, I've been out with you, obviously as an adult, quite a lot. I've never heard it.
Yeah, probably because they feel as though they can't when there's another older parent there or someone who's older. They feel too embarrassed, or they just wouldn't feel able to. But when you're alone, they just feel they can attack you, especially as a young Chinese woman.
Have they ever physically attacked you?
No. No.
Oh, good. That's one thing.
I mean, not for racial reasons. Other physical abuse.
Yeah. But it sounds very similar to the sexism when I was young, the sort of the wolf whistling and the calling out of passers-by and men.
Yeah, I mean, I get that too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You still get the wolf whistle.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That on top of all the racist slurs. Yeah.
But it does sound a very similar sort of thing, and so I sort of know that you sort of just let it go, don't you? I think that people are saying, feminists are saying nowadays, we've been letting it go all our lives. That some men don't realise that you're always on the watch, and that's probably the same in racist situations, isn't it? You're always on the watch, you're always being wary, you're always thinking about your safety. That's normal for women, and I suspect for a lot of racial groups that's normal as well, isn't it? I did think about whether it was a racist country. Obviously I knew it was, and whether I could justify bringing you to this country away from a country where you would have fitted in completely. I'm not saying it wasn't a racist country, because I think China also has a racist background, doesn't it, with some attitudes. I think because it's so enclosed, China regards anyone who's non-Chinese as being different. But I felt on the whole it would be all right. So I wonder if I would have gone ahead if I'd thought it would be quite like that from your description now. I wonder if I would have gone ahead, but too late now, eh? Do you think it's worth it? Putting up with it is worth it to be here?
I think everywhere else, if I'd grown up anywhere else other than China, I would have had to experience some level of racism. Anywhere, because every country, there's going to be racist people.
Yeah.
And if anything, it might be worse in other countries. Well, I know, for example, America's worse than here.
Is it?
Yeah.
For the Chinese? Or for everyone?
For everyone. America's definitely worse, and they're a lot more vocal about it. And growing up in England, or at least London, at least I was surrounded by other non-whites. Whereas if I had grown up in maybe a Scandinavian country and I was just surrounded by other white people, it would have been a lot more difficult.
Yeah. And how important do you think a child's sense of belonging is with all these issues of adoption and transracial and so on? How difficult has that been, and how important has it been?
I think a sense of belonging is always important for anyone. Any child wants to fit in. No one really wants to feel as though they're different or they stand out. But especially for adopted children, transracially adopted children, where their family members just don't look like them at all unless they have another adopted sibling. I would say it's very important, and it's why a lot of adoptees I come across have the feeling of being tugged between two countries or two cultures, and it's why a lot of my friends that I relate to are also in similar positions, where either they come from mixed race families or they come from families where they were born and raised in England, but they're culturally their family's from a completely different country and culture. So that's how we're able to relate to each other, because we feel as though we don't necessarily belong entirely in England, but then we don't belong entirely in China. And I think we touched upon that in a previous episode a bit.
Yeah.
But I think, the sense of belonging is very important, to feel as though you know who you are, and you see other people who are like you, and you are comfortable in your own skin.
Do you feel comfortable, would you say, with white people, of which there are many in this country, obviously, lots and lots of millions? Do you feel comfortable with white people? Because I'm very aware that neither of my daughters has ever had a white boyfriend. And I wonder if that's a rejection of me and my family as being white.
No, of course not. It's just by chance. You know that I've fancied white men in the past. and actually, my first primary school boyfriend, secondary school boyfriend, when I was in year 8, he was white.
Gosh. Yeah. Well, there we go.
Yes.
So what about we've got lots of friends, haven't we, adopted from China and elsewhere. Did they go out with white boyfriends, would you say? Or?
I think from the top of my head, most that I know who are in relationships are going out with white men. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think a few are going out with black or mixed race or Indian.
No Chinese?
No Chinese.
Amazing.
No.
Is that just a lack of Chinese people in this country, or is that because they're not attracted to Chinese people, or what?
Well, yeah, I think there aren't really many Chinese people. I've not really come across many Chinese men, to be honest, at all. Really, I don't really come across them.
Well, they do exist.
Yeah, but in a capacity to get to know them on that level, I haven't really come across any on a regular basis. And second of all, I think culturally, if they're native Chinese, it's very different. So
no, but what about British Chinese? There's lots of those. There were lots of those Chinese boys at your Saturday school, for example.
Yeah, I know there's lots of British Chinese, but I'm trying to think where, recently I've not come across any. In my adulthood, beyond Chinese Saturday school, there's been barely any British Chinese men that I've come across.
One of your friends is going out with one.
Yeah, but that's through my friend, myself. I've not been in any situation where I've met, where I've been in contact with them, really. No, I haven't.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I think it's not necessarily the fact that we're not attracted to them, it's more that we don't even get exposure to them. Where are they? So, yeah, maybe if we had
Apply
the opportunity...
below in the comments.
If we had the opportunity, maybe, but they just, I guess, on a day-to-day basis, if the white people are there, the white men, then obviously you're going to just interact and get to know white men, and then therefore there's a higher chance of you then getting and being with a white person.
So you don't think there's anything of significance about who goes out with who or anything like that?
I think maybe there's an underlying, there's a slight unwillingness to maybe go out with someone who is Chinese. I know that some adoptees that I've spoken to feel as though, at least with a native Chinese person, man or woman, they feel more awkward because they feel as though they look Chinese, so they should therefore speak Chinese and know Chinese etiquette and know Chinese culture. And if they were going out with someone who had all of that, I mean, whether native Chinese or British-born Chinese, they would have had that upbringing in that Chinese household. They feel too awkward because they feel as though they should belong, but they don't, and that they look the part, but then they're not actually that part because they're adopted. So maybe there's that reluctance to even want to consider a Chinese man if they were even in that scenario. But as I said, where are the Chinese men? Because I've not been around any.
But haven't you said that some of the Chinese adoptees that you know think of themselves as being white?
Yeah, one of my friends did a study, and lots of adoptees actually do master's studies and theses, and in these adoption groups they're always looking for people to take part in these questionnaires and surveys and interviews and things. And yeah, one of them was, well, quite a few actually I've had to answer, what do you identify as? And I identify as British Chinese, but a lot of people from that study, I've read her thesis since, I don't know the people personally, but have identified as white, yeah.
I find that amazing, that not so much that they might secretly think that, but that they're self-aware enough to sort of tick the box that they think they're white. I'm surprised they're not in denial about it, but yeah. So they've grown up in a white society, in a white family, and they really think that they're white. Yeah.
There's the term, banana, being called a banana. You're yellow on the outside, white on the inside.
Yeah.
Which is, I think, quite insulting and quite hurtful.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of adoptees get called bananas.
Have you been called a banana?
No, thankfully I haven't. But I remember on my gap year, teaching English, I remember at the time thinking I'd be really upset if they called me a banana, but they didn't. Maybe they did to themselves, but never to my face.
Yeah. So what do you think will happen with these people who are Chinese ethnically, but they think of themselves as white? Do you think they'll be okay in life to go on like that?
I think it just represents the difficulties and struggles that adoptees have growing up with their identity, with their sense of belonging, with, you know, a lot of the time, well, one of my friends, you know, thinks that it's less that they actually truly believe that they're white, but it's more that they just wish that they're white, because if they were white, things would be easier for them, because they've grown up in a white family with a white cultural upbringing and background, and so therefore if they were just white, because they feel white, their whole existence has been kind of white, apart from what they visibly look like, their surroundings and everything, then it would just be a lot easier for them to fit in, to feel as though they don't stand out, to relate to others easier. And yeah, I think it's really sad and it's really difficult, but that is again a sad reality of being adopted, that people do face different struggles, and this is one of them.
Have you ever thought of doing any research into any of this?
Yeah, I have. Sadly, I don't have much time for all of my interests. I've always considered maybe doing even a master's in this, or even a PhD, but I just can't afford that time to not be earning money or anything.
And there are quite a lot of people doing these bits of research, aren't there? Yes.
So I guess that brings us to the end of this episode, talking about whether transracial adoption is positive or negative. And I think we kind of agree that it's very subjective, and it's based on a variety of different factors and elements, and it's a very complex question to answer and to consider. But we've spoken a bit about our own personal experiences, and yeah, we'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about whether you think transracial adoption is positive or negative, whether you've had personal experience with it, or just generally what your thoughts are.
Yeah, this is the last episode of the season, and we have lots of other ideas, like inviting Ching to take part and inviting maybe some other friends and contacts to take part if people would be interested.
Yeah, so I think across the past 8 episodes, we've covered a lot about transracial adoption, and we've spoken about our own personal experience, as well as delve into a few other specific topics to do with it related to adoption. So yeah, if there are any specific things or questions you have, or things you'd like us to touch upon in a bit more detail in future episodes in the next season, if we decide to do one and if there's enough interest, then yeah, please do let us know in the comment section below. And if you're not watching on YouTube and you're listening on any of the other streaming platforms, then come on over to YouTube and let us know in the comments if there's any specific requests for upcoming episodes. But yeah, thank you so much for listening to us, and we will hopefully see you in future episodes.
Bye.
Bye.